from the Mutual Broadcasting System. This is STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk. Now, retired Marine Intelligence Officer and globally recognized risk expert Hal Kempfer.
Welcome to STRAT, Strategic Risk Assessment Talk. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. I'm sure a number of you have seen me on LiveNow from Fox, where I'm interviewed by a number of anchors. And of course, top amongst them, and I would put it in, I would say one of the top two anchors that interview me, at least by duration, certainly, is Austin Westfall. And Austin is actually sitting in the backup studio at LiveNow, live now. And we're going to talk about a variety of different things, talk about live streaming news, what's different, how they do this now, and it's going to kind of touch on some of the economies of scale, if you will, in terms of how they do this. But anyway, Austin, welcome to Strat. The tables have turned, my friend. I'm going to ask you questions, so there, all right?
I feel like a fish out of water. I have no control over this interview, and it scares me a little bit, but I think we're going to make it. And yes, I'm going to challenge you right off the bat here. What's our actual branding name? I know you had trouble with this when you were with Andrew.
Branding name?
What's the LiveNow proper branding name?
Well, I say Fox Live Now, but it's Live Now from Fox. That's the way they put it out there. So
bingo. Yeah, there we go. Yes. All right. But, and by the way, I got to say, I watched Andrew Kraft's appearance, and I would agree with you. Out of the two LiveNow anchors that you've had, I am indeed in the top two. I would argue that I'm in the top one because I like to speak in a way that actually makes sense to people. Kraft dropped the word obsequious when he was with you last time.
That was pretty impressive. Yeah. I tell you.
We like to speak in a way that makes sense to people, though. Like that's the art of journalism. Is you're supposed to make things make sense to people. So I hope everybody understands 100% of today's podcast, and I hope to be the top one LiveNow anchor.
I'm telling you, when we got off the air, I talked to Andrew about that. I said, "Look, I have a feeling that you're actually a disestablishmentarianist," and I stuck with that. All right, and he's still pondering that. So anyway. Yeah. But let's talk about your background. Let's talk about your close connection with all of Hollywood royalty. Coming from Chatsworth and Southern California. Quality time in Santa Clarita in that hot media market up there. And of course the Cronkite School. So let's introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners.
Yeah. So, born and raised in Los Angeles. In fact, you mentioned Chatsworth, and it's funny. One Hollywood connection to that is Val Kilmer, who sadly passed recently. Him and I graduated from the same high school, Chatsworth High School. We grew up in Chatsworth. I did go to Santa Clarita for a little bit in college. I worked for the newspaper in Santa Clarita. For those familiar with who are not familiar with Southern California, Santa Clarita is a part of LA County, just about a 30-minute drive or so north, depending on traffic, from downtown LA. Spent some time as a newspaper reporter, went out to the Cronkite School eventually, which is one of the better broadcast journalism schools in the country, moved to the Central Valley of California for my first TV news job in Bakersfield, not too far away from your hometown stomping grounds of Visalia, California.
Well, Tulare County, but yeah.
Tulare County.
I'll tell you it was a big city from where I'm from. I'm actually from Porterville, but yeah.
Porterville. Yeah. And so Tulare County, not too far away from Kern County, where I was working. And then from Bakersfield, I got hired at Fox. There was a position available for a multimedia reporter role, which basically means you're a one-man band who works for Fox News Cable Channel, and you're sent around the country doing breaking news stories and I think I had been to 12 U.S. states when I started that job. By the end of that job, I had visited 48 U.S. states. Wow. So that job took me all over the country, and it helped me prepare for what I'm doing now with LiveNow, which is talking about the U.S. and storms and true crime and stories that cover every corner of the country. I'm so thankful that I got to do that traveling gig, because now I've actually been to so many of these places that I talk about every day. And then, of course, having people like you, when we talk about these international subjects, when we, can't book our first or our second or our third string experts and analysts, that's when our fourth stringer, Hal Kempfer, comes on nightly. So we appreciate your efforts, Hal.
Yeah, it's nice to know that I'm somewhere down on the bottom of the list, and I still get in there every now and again. And it is surprising how many first stringer, second stringers turn you guys down flatly. I find that rather shocking. And it's interesting because Andrew says that doesn't happen to him. He says it happens to you more often, but I don't want to get into that whole discussion. That's something else.
I'm probably a better interviewer, so they're probably intimidated by me. That's probably
that would be it. Yeah, that was my thought. Yeah, intimidation. Yeah, right. Which seems rather obsequious. Anyway, with that said, do you want to show off the studio a little bit? Would you like to? Yeah. This is LiveNow from Fox. All right, and LiveNow is different. I think we should mention LiveNow is not the only live streaming news. Most of the major, or at least a number of the major networks, have live streaming news, and I should probably come clean a little bit and let you know that at one time before I was on LiveNow, I was on a network that's now under Cheddar, and Cheddar has kind of had that live streaming. They were kind of one of the early innovators in that live streaming area with news and stuff. But I'm gonna give us a little walk, show us what's going on.
So, people who watch LiveNow regularly, and if anybody notices that the anchors, we look like traditional broadcast anchors, but you might notice every once in a while that we're looking off to the side. Maybe we're looking down a little more often than your average news person. It's because LiveNow, and the uniqueness of LiveNow, is that we all have a miniature control room right in front of us. What this allows us to do is it allows us to basically, I can control the video that's on the screen. So instead of a news anchor and a producer and a control room and tons of other people all having to read each other's minds in order to move from one segment to the next, instead it's kind of my stream of consciousness. I have a very simplified version of a control room in front of me. This all looks very overwhelming to the untrained eye, but really all I'm working with here are these bottom row of buttons, and these bottom row of buttons are triggering these video feeds up here, and then it triggers them onto our air, which is this screen right here. It does have a learning curve to it. This is a unique setup. You're not going to see something like this anywhere else. Our brilliant technician here, Weldon Watson, kind of did a Frankenstein operation, and over the years has really made something, a powerful system that again is very unique. And we use this for live streams, and we have a producer that's going to come in here right now because we are using this backup set for a YouTube stream right now. Ryan's about to walk past. There's Ryan. People who watch us on air sometimes know that I'm sometimes asking Ryan, hey, can you help us pull up a tweet, or can we write a graphic, depending on what we're talking about. So right now, Ryan, not only does she help us with graphics and things and YouTube uploads, but right now she's in here working on a live stream for YouTube because there's an air show going on. We prioritize live coverage here, so we're sending out a feed of an air show that's going on right now. So walk and talk wise, let's show you again. I'm on the backup set right now, so I'm going to take you into the main room here. It's a big think tank in here. This is pretty much just an open air space where all of the producers, all of the hosts, all of the managers, we all kind of work in one room, and we all kind of just yell out to each other when we need to. If we see a live stream is coming in, if we hear of breaking news going on, we all kind of have this innate ability to just turn that breaking news mode on, work as a team, get graphics going, get the anchors talking about the live news. And ultimately, again, it's a learning curve, and this is a unique setup, but we've got a backup set here that I'll show you. This is actually the side monitor. If anybody was watching our election coverage, this was the side monitor where I was doing a lot of the maps and stuff on election night.
No. Let me clarify. When you were doing that, when you were doing the stand-up thing, as near as we can figure, we did track that you didn't quite exceed Cory Booker's speech in the Senate, but you came darn close, as I recall. So
Cory did 25 hours. I did 10 hours that night of pointing at maps and such. But one of the cool things, another little unique thing that they jerry-rigged for us here tonight is I have this iPad, and I can use this iPad. I'm literally tapping on this iPad right now, I'm clicking buttons, and what it's doing is it's triggering different live feeds
That's
on the
wild.
monitor back there.
Wow.
So that's a live feed of the White House, obviously. So if I'm talking about the president, or if I'm talking about, anything about the executive branch, I can hit a button while I'm talking up here, and bam, we've got a visual behind me that makes sense. If there's a protest going on, which, you know what? It's funny I say that because I'll go through some of these feeds right now, actually, because there are protests going on now. There's anti-Trump protests going on around the country on the day that we're taping this. So if I'm talking about something like that, I can have the visuals back there to support me for it. Our anchor, Christina Evans, is live right now. She's in a commercial break. She's slamming right now.
I am. I'm trying to get some things ready behind the scenes.
So that's the main set. This is where you and I do all of our interviews, Hal. A lot of people have questions about what exactly this all looks like. And again, I'll be quick because Christina is in the middle of a break and getting things set up. But it looks a lot like our backup set. She's handling making graphics sometimes. Ryan helps with making graphics. But, we're getting Zoom interviews set up. We're getting, a lot of times, too, weather maps. We've got all kinds of stuff up here. There's an almost unending amount of screens and little toys that you can play with up here. And makeup is an important one. The lighting is pretty harsh here, so it's really easy to look really shiny. So we all have our powder up there to make sure we're not too shiny.
Yeah, that's been the bane of my existence. Yeah. So yeah.
And I think that's one thing that folks don't realize is we are a one-man band up there. We do have the support of wonderful producers like Ryan, and I'm back in the backup set now. But it really allows for a more dynamic and a more fluid newscast when just one stream of consciousness is controlling everything. Because if I think of a last second, follow-up question to you about Gaza, then I can pull up a picture of Gaza while I'm asking you that question instead of the control room reading my mind and pulling up Gaza for me, So that's the perk of doing something like this. And there's a learning curve to it at first. It took me a few months to not be sweating and palms sweaty and be like, oh my gosh, I hope I don't mess anything up or hit the wrong button. There's a learning curve to it, but I'm a year and a half into it now. And at this point, it's fairly more comfortable. Not 1,000% comfortable, but, you get better and better every day, just like anything else.
It seems pretty smooth. And it is interesting as we'll be talking, you will pop up something, and I figure the reason you pop up something is just to get off of my face. It's like they've seen enough Hal. That's the end of that. This is a picture of Paris. It has nothing to do with what Hal's talking about. But wouldn't you rather look at the Eiffel Tower than look at Hal?
Sometimes it's an editorial judgment to show something that's relevant to the coverage. Other times it's an aesthetic judgment because we need to get
just to avoid looking at me any longer and necessary. That would make sense. Sure,
absolutely.
So yeah. And it is fascinating though. It does add a certain dynamic. When I started doing, I don't know what you want to call it, talking head stuff, expert stuff. I go to the studio and what you have there in front of you would be if you go to like a studio, say in Southern California, like one of the big ones, one that I worked with for years. They got a whole control room, and it was at that time. This is the technology was not quite as advanced, and the place was packed. I mean, you walked in there was like probably, not a half dozen, but closer to a dozen people that were in that control room doing what you do while you're on air, while you're talking. That just tells you how things have changed so dramatically. And certainly for the network stuff, when you go into there, they still kind of have that whole network news thing that goes back there, but you're seeing things are getting automated more. And that the station I just mentioned that had the whole newsroom, not only has that changed, but years ago they went to the robotic camera thing. So you didn't even have the cameraman there; it was all robotically controlled and stuff. And you had to make sure to stay away from the robots because the robots, unlike Waymo or anything, had no sense of anybody being there. So when they move, they were doing their own thing, and if you were there, they were taking you down. So pretty much they've set up with some sort of software. They tell these cameras where to go, and what this did is it eliminated jobs for people who manned these cameras and for floor directors that used to be in newsrooms. And so what this did is it just made it so that these cameras, instead of a cameraman moving it from set 1 to set 2,
they just pre-programmed set 1 and set 2. And so that's why and if anybody ever gets a chance to see this, it's actually kind of fascinating. These big camera rigs, they just move themselves from one place to another, and they know exactly how to lock on to where they're supposed to lock on to. It's fascinating.
It's an interesting set experience too, because, when I first started this stuff, you'd have like a couple of photographers, a couple of cameramen that were there, and then you'd have the director, the news director. And so you had this thing going on, and then you have all the talent, if you will, the anchors, weather, everything. So, and then you'd have people popping in off the set all the time with, at that time, breaking news was a thing that came in on paper that would get handed over to the anchor or whatever while you're there. So it was a very busy, sort of very people-intensive thing. And then years later, I'd be there with an anchor or two anchors. That was it. There was no news director. There were no photographers. There was nothing. It was all being done remotely. The cameras moved themselves, seemed to have a mind of their own and everything. But it was a very, almost kind of a lonely experience on the set, if you know what I mean. So, yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, another thing that's fascinating about our operation here is we don't have teleprompters. This is something I always like to let everybody know, because that's one of the big questions we get is who's feeding you what you need to say? How do you know what to say? That's our camera right there.
Yeah.
There's no teleprompter. Everything is ad-libbed, whether it's on this backup set or whether it's on the main set. Everything is ad-libbed. Everything is that, again, that stream of consciousness that all of think about us, we're DJs, like a disc jockey at a radio station is kind of, there's no scripts. You're just kind of talking and you're playing music and you're deciding what to do next and you're deciding what to play. A DJ in the news stands for digital journalist, and we're doing a lot of the same stuff. We're improvising, we're talking to that camera, and then we're using this array of buttons in front of me to supplement the coverage with whatever we're doing. LiveNow during the day, if you watch, is mostly live events. We air events in full, uninterrupted. We want to make sure that everybody gets the full, unedited versions of these things so that they can hear every word of what everybody says instead of short sound bites. I'm on the later shift. So anybody that's seen you and I discuss, we usually talk at length. Usually we're at night. Usually there's not a whole lot of restrictions. So you and I can go on for 15 minutes long and it's nothing. We can get in depth into topics. And that's one of the great things about a product like this is it's very loose and it's very experimental. It's a unique thing, Hal. And I think it's something that is resonating with the viewers is a very, if you'll call it a less inflammatory version of the news and more aimed toward an educational, long form version.
It's interesting you say that, and that's been a big criticism. It used to be, if you go back way back when, all right, when CNN came out, it was going to be 24/7 news, very innovative, Ted Turner and the whole thing. And then headline news was every 30 minutes. And I will tell you, I can't give you all the details, but I can say, overseas, all right, I'm in the crisis action team of a 4-star command, all right, and I'm the intel guy, and we got a major global crisis, one that the Situation Room at the White House is tracking at the same time, all right, and that was the days when headline news was actually headline news. Every 30 minutes, they would roll through another thing, and so if something made the cut on headline news, it would get hit over and over and over and over again. And I remember one thing, it was what we call fake news today, but it was a speculation thing was out there. It's like, all these boats, we're watching an exodus coming out of Haiti and Cuba. Well, they had all these empty boats that were floating around that had no people in them. So the speculation was, all these people have drowned, that the Coast Guard and the Navy just sat there and let these people drown or whatever it was. What it was is they were evacuating people off the boats. They just didn't have a protocol on what to do with the boats. There was no rule you had to sink them. There was no way to mark them or whatever. So anyway, this thing got picked up in the half-hour feed over and over and over and over again. And I remember watching that first thing. I go, we're going to get a call from somewhere near Washington, D.C. in about 10 minutes. And I was wrong. 5 minutes.
All right.
And they go, what's going on? And we kind of tried to explain what we thought was happening, and they had to validate it later on. But that was that period of time. But then they went away from it. Headline news today, HLN doesn't even do news. It's all, there was a murder in northern Arkansas, and they go through that. And then CNN, same thing with Big Fox and everything else. They have these shows that they do, and they've really gotten into the show thing. And I think that's what people miss. They want a place where they can actually tune in and see what's going on. And I think, I mean, I'm not saying the others don't do it. They do. There's other streaming news services, NBC, ABC stuff. But I think LiveNow does it very well. And do you want to say anything about the viewership? Because the numbers are really actually pretty good.
Well, one thing I will say is there is so much good journalism out there. The journalism industry as a whole gets it's become, I'll use the word inflammatory again. There's a lot of inflammation around how the news is presented, and truth be told, most news correspondents and most news anchors do their best job to bring reliable information to their audiences. It doesn't matter what news outlet you're talking about. Most people do their best to bring the news reliably and accurately. Of course, there is a subset of that population that doesn't do that. Most people, I think, like LiveNow because, and I don't even know how my bosses would feel about me using this word, but I'm going to use it anyway because I like to think of my own interviews this way. I don't mind if sometimes things are a little boring because, let's be honest, just giving the straight facts and giving the news, sometimes that's what that requires, I find.
I got the sense that when you said the word boring, you were looking at me a little bit more intently on that one. Yeah. Because it was bringing something immediately to mind. But that may have just been my impression.
There's a reason why you're on our air 6 or 7 days a week, Hal. It's because we like boring. I think a lot of the time...
That's so nice the way you put that. Yeah.
Yeah. More or less, I would say the viewership is growing at LiveNow because people are looking for something that's easy to watch or easy to listen to. I think a lot of people nowadays consume their media while they're doing something else. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if they're listening to a podcast, if they're listening to the news, if they've got, their fourth repeat of watching The Office on, their streaming service. I think a lot of people have these things on in the background while they're vacuuming or while they're gardening or while they're just scrolling on their phones or while they're dozing off, falling asleep. So long form content it makes sense. It makes sense. People are in the car and they're driving to work. They've got a 30-minute commute. They got an hour-long commute. It's a very listenable experience LiveNow because if there's something big going on, you're not going to get a 90-second news package that explains what's going on and it's over. No, you're going to get, look, if there's a presidential speech, if last year President Biden was speaking, or if this year President Trump is speaking, we're taking it in full. We're going to let you listen into his entire thing. We're going to let you listen into, the soundbite parts of it, but it's going to be in the context of everything else that was said in the speech, which is what's missing from a lot of news. And then guys like me will come on afterward. We'll do these long form interviews, usually between 10 and 15 minutes. You and I have gone 40, 50, 60 minutes sometimes for major breaking news events. And again, it all comes from the angle of we want an educational experience for our audience. And let's be honest, there's plenty of news outlets out there. If people are looking for something that has a certain slant to it, there's plenty of that out there. What we all try to do is we try to cover all sides, and we try to not only cover all sides, but give you the full experience of all sides. Some people think that that's an interesting idea. Like, why would I want to sit and listen to a speech for 15 minutes or 20 minutes straight? Well, sometimes it's important to hear the full context of these things. If you watch some broadcast news, you're going to get a 15-second snippet of what somebody said in a speech or in an interview. But there's a lot missing. That doesn't tell the full story. So I think that's why the viewership has been, we've been delighted to see, viewership on nights like election night, on Inauguration Day, during the State of the Union speech recently, which wasn't actually technically a State of the Union speech, but for all intents and purposes, it looked like a State of the Union speech. The numbers speak for themselves. People like long form content without talking heads interrupting it.
You know, it's interesting too. And actually we talked for so long, and same thing with Andrew. We'll talk for so long. I have to be careful when I go back and do like a regular network or station news stuff. I have to like turn a key to go back into succinct mode, because we'll talk about something for 15, 20 minutes. When you're on with them, it's 2-3 minutes. So you have to have a little timer in the back of your head where you just, close off your interview so fast. But we get into more in-depth stuff. And I really feel, and particularly when we have, you're on, and then we'll have maybe a couple of different, like we do a panel thing. We get into some fascinating discussions, and we get really into the not just what, but what does it mean? What implications could come out of this? Maybe even a little bit into the why, that's into that. So it's really interesting. And then every once in a while we'll take, I call it a trip around the world. Not always a trip around the world, but we'll take a serious road trip where we start in the Middle East, end up in Ukraine, or vice versa, and then maybe, hey, as long as we're talking about Ukraine and the Middle East, that brings immediately to mind, South China Sea and Greenland, and so we'll cover a lot of different things, and I like the fact that we can do that. It's a very relaxing, and that's one thing a lot of people don't realize. You're not reading a teleprompter.
No.
What you're doing is when it's a sincere, and I mean sincere as it's not scripted. What's going on there is an actual discussion, and you're guiding it as it's going along. And I remember the first time I was on a set, and the anchor was reading the teleprompter. First time I'd ever had a teleprompter. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. Looking into the camera, and you see the teleprompter stuff right there, and they're scripted, and I wasn't. So it was going down, and it was like, and he's reading his stuff, and then it had Hal, and it said blah, 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 or something like that.
Yeah.
You have no idea how hard it was to not say blah, blah, blah on the air. I almost read it because I was looking into the camera, but I can't help but see what's being said there. And it was kind of an interesting thing.
It's fascinating too, because based off of, kind of bouncing off of what you're saying there is, I think that's another reason why people are starting to kind of get attracted to our format, is because it's a little more, it just feels a little more, and it's tough to talk about this without disparaging other news outlets. Because again, there's a lot of great journalism out there. It doesn't matter what outlet you're talking about. There's so much good work being done out there. But one thing that I like to do, and I've probably used this phrase in many interviews with you, is let's go back to political science 101, or let's go back to history 101. I think sometimes people turn on cable news any time of the day, and you're just kind of thrown into this thing, and you're expected to know the background of everything that's come before it, and there's these high level discussions that are happening, and the common person who's just getting home from work, or who's on YouTube, and they're just browsing to try and figure out a subject. Let's be honest, some people are news hounds, and it makes sense to them no matter what, but there's probably a pretty good portion of the population that needs that history 101, that needs to know, instead of talking about, Signalgate and the Secretary of Defense, maybe it's good to start at history 101 or U.S. Political Science 101, whatever it may be. Who is the Secretary of Defense, and why is that position important, and what does that person do? And then we can get into the nitty gritty of Signalgate. It comes from a place, again, of educating the audience, and that's another thing that I hope people get from LiveNow.
Well, it was interesting. The tariff announcement. Not that made any news, but the imposing of tariffs, and I actually had the chance to say on LiveNow, referencing. I said, like many, I don't remember if it was you or Andrew that I said this to, but it was one of you two, one of the two most frequent anchors I talked to at LiveNow. But I referenced David Ricardo, a 19th century economics philosopher, and the concept of comparative advantage. And I remember thinking at the time, as I was saying, I'm like, I might be rather unique in news television that I'm actually talking about David Ricardo with this story. I just don't think that's coming up very often.
Yeah.
And so
I think I said, after you said that, I think I said, yes, as we all know.
As we all know, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, another David Ricardo reference. But look, let's get down to this, all right? Yeah.
And that brings us back to the obsequious thing. Are there plenty of people out there who know what obsequious means? Of course. But what they teach you in journalism school is to drop obsequious and just use, you know what bugs me, what grinds my gears a lot, Hal, is when the police will do this a lot, and the police can get away with this. But when news presenters use the word individual, an individual was arrested. When we're just talking every day, do we talk about individuals? No, we talk about people.
Yeah.
It's a person. We like to speak conversationally. That's what professional communication is. You got to talk in a way that makes sense to people and sounds right to people.
Yeah. By the way, if I could kind of shift, because we're going to run out of time here, but I do want to talk about something rather interesting. You did something, of course, you're from Southern California, as you mentioned. You know the area very well. Well, we had a couple of big fires out here not that long ago. Palisades Fire and the Eaton Fire. You know, we're talking about this. You're covering it live from LiveNow. Some of that feed was actually Fox 11 in LA, but then you actually got tapped to do something, which kind of puts you almost in some ways on both sides of fire. Do you want to explain that?
So, more or less, what happens when a major scale news event breaks out like that is there's plenty of resources in Los Angeles for all of the news outlets out there. But when something that major happens, they got to bring in reinforcements. And that was the case with the Palisades and the Eaton fires. I didn't even get sent out there primarily for LiveNow coverage. I was sent out there because KTTV, Fox 11, given the scope and the scale of everything that was going on, they were flying people in from across the country to help out and supplement their coverage, because we're talking about, 10 different places around LA County that have serious news going on, and they need a reporter there on the ground at all of these different sites. So me being from Southern California, they kind of looked at me and they're like, hey, you kind of know the area. Can you come out here and help? So I did 2 weeks of coverage out there. They weren't consecutive. I did 1 week in January, and then I did 1 week in February. Mm-hmm. At that point, a lot of it was recovery, and it was the immediate aftermath. And then another time it was more just like checking in with people, making sure that they're getting the resources they need. People that lost everything. There were lawsuits that were starting to come out against power companies because they were starting to look at, hey, how did these fires even start that killed people? So yes, I got sent out there, and we were able to be on the ground basically, in the thick of it. I was one of the first people to just do a walk and talk. I just went out there with my phone, on PCH there. For folks who are not familiar with the area, PCH is this gorgeous stretch of highway. It's a famous highway.
Pacific Coast Highway, which is called Pacific Coast Highway because it's on the Pacific Coast, right?
The Pacific Coast. Yeah. And it's a beautiful drive right along beautiful areas like Malibu, which is, of course, what was impacted. So, people who are from Southern California, like you and I, or you're not from there, but you live there, you know these areas as being some of the more beautiful places in Southern California. And these fires just evaporated so much of this beauty. I was one of the first guys who went into the Palisades and went on to PCH, and I just took my phone out there and I recorded like a 40-minute long walk and talk, posted it on TikTok, and showed everybody. Now we've all seen the images, but seeing that in person is, and I think PCH is open now at this point, so a lot of people can drive through it and see it at this point. But, it's quite, we always have this idea in Southern California that wildfires happen in the mountains. And if you've got enough concrete and you've got enough sidewalk and you've got enough streets and buildings, it doesn't make it too far out of the mountains. The Eaton fire was different.
Oh, yeah.
The Eaton fire was a monster. The Eaton fire, the perfect storm of crazy strong winds, Santa Ana winds, it just pushed the Eaton fire from the mountains, from the Eaton Canyon area, and far into the Altadena and portions of Pasadena area.
It became an urban firestorm is what it became. Yeah.
Like scenes out of Paradise, California, in some areas. So it was absolutely devastating seeing what happened there and speaking with the families that lost everything. We told a lot of heartbreaking stories of people who not only had to deal with property loss, but one man I was talking to was, His kidneys were just happening to fail in the week leading up to the fire. So he was already dealing with that. Then he loses his home, and now he's got to work through all these governmental things to get him, things like his driver's license back and his eventually getting into property. And it's such a never ending story. I could go back to LA right now and there would still be too many stories to cover, because this recovery process isn't going anywhere for a long time. I got to say, it was heartbreaking to see that happen in my home community, but it was also heartwarming to see how much help showed up and how people came together to get the back of everybody who lost family members, lost property, people who didn't have power and water for weeks and weeks and weeks. At some of these places, I saw more help at the community resource centers. There were more volunteers than there were victims. So that was a cool thing to see the Angelenos come together like that.
You actually, it's something with emergencies too. You had to, I saw you covering a few things. People bring stuff that they don't really want them to bring. And it's tough for an aid center when they get stuff coming in. People bring drop-off stuff, say, here's this. It's like, yeah, okay, but we don't actually need slinkies. But thank you for bringing the slinkies in. They'll bring things that they can't actually use, and they're trying to be nice. They want to keep the aid going. I thought that was actually very well handled this time. I've seen it before. As you know, I got a kind of a background with emergency management issues. I've seen it before where it's not managed well at all. And they end up either accepting a bunch of stuff they can't use, which is like, thank you for the ice skates. That'll come in, that's invaluable. But I've seen, but I thought it was very well done. I thought you covered that extremely well.
Yeah, one piece of advice I would give, if there's ever a situation that presents itself in your community, wherever you're watching this from, if there's ever a situation like that presents itself, call your local donation center before you go, or visit it before you go, because they might be too busy to answer the phone, and ask them what they need, because it depends location to location. And the first place I went to was in West LA, and they literally had so many generous companies donating new clothes to them, and everybody was bringing them all their used clothes, and it was taking up way too much real estate. So they just were like, stop bringing us clothes. What we really need are toiletries and allergy medicine, cold medicine. And so if you call ahead, and you could be a lot more, it's unfortunate because people are generous and they're bringing used items, but you're right. The fact of the matter is, sometimes some things are not necessary and they can take up valuable real estate. So if anything comes up like that, if you're in a storm zone in the southeast, if you're in a tornado zone in the Midwest, if you're in a fire zone in the southwest, if you're in a blizzard somewhere, if you're going to be that generous person, it usually, what I learned from the fires is you can be of best help by calling ahead and asking. What do you
getting clarification? So it's like, great, we've got tons of Campbell's soup, and now we got a whole warehouse full of that. But what we really needed was more diapers and some other things are frequent use things that they run out of. Hey, we've gone on for quite some time. I hate to do this. We could maybe we'll do a 24/7 podcast. That might be a thought. But
sure.
Hey, Austin, I want to thank you.
Absolutely.
A great tour, great discussion. I'm just looking at this, and in terms of some of the interviews that I have had on Strat, I would put you up in the top 2. And I'm trying to think who the other interviewee was. I'm trying to remember. Yeah,
he's not very memorable. I don't think.
I don't know, anyway. But hey, I just want to thank you, and it's been great spending some time with you. It's been a great tour. Do you have any final thoughts?
I want to say thank you to you. I give you a hard time about being our 4th string guest, but the reality is you're our first string.
I got bumped up from 6, I think, last time we talked about this. But yeah, okay, cool.
The reality is you're very generous with your time. You're a first string guest, and your expertise is invaluable to us. We are unique in the way that we tackle international news. I think perhaps, at least on YouTube, our clips get a wide reach. Our international and national security clips get a wide reach. And a lot of that is because of smart people like you, brilliant people like you, who speak in a way that makes sense to people, and your depth of knowledge is unmatched. And I can't thank you enough for everything you do for us here. We appreciate you greatly. And Andrew, I got to say also, who's been a great mentor to me, as you know, he's been here for 4 or 5
that would
years.
Be Andrew Kraft. All right.
Andrew Kraft, who I have also been giving a hard time on this podcast.
Right.
He's my best buddy in the newsroom. I'm only giving him a hard time because I love to give my best buddies a hard time. But Andrew's been a great mentor to me and welcomed me into this room and made me, it made me feel comfortable in a way that's allowed me to grow. And even, I think it shows in you and I's interviews that, we really do find a groove over time, and you get a chemistry. And I find that a lot of the positive feedback that I get about our interviews is people just look forward to listening. For sometimes, I think one of my favorite comments I ever saw was, oh, wow, I normally like seeing Austin and Hal for their 10 or 15 minute clips, but this one is 55 minutes. Oh my gosh, this is a treat. Like, that was one of my favorite things I ever saw, because I genuinely hope that and it might be a small subset of the population, but I genuinely hope that people get, they learn something from our discussions. And so I want to thank you for being that voice that allows us to do that.
No, hey, thank you for having me on. And thanks when you said experts, you kind of included me in that instead of saying we love to have top experts on and Hal. I appreciate that you didn't make that distinction this time. Okay. So anyway, hey, thanks. And I'm hoping to have you on at some point in the future on Strat, where we've touched on a number of strategic risk assessment things today. Part of what you did with the fires is how people assess risk and what's happening there. And of course, we assess risk every time we're on the air. We talk about things that affect not just risk here at home, but risk around the world, and risk around the world that affects things here at home. So anyway, thanks. And of course, if you want to see more of you and me, and there are other anchors out there that I do talk to, don't take it personal. All right. You can go to obviously Hal Kempfer TV on YouTube, and stratpodcast.com is where you can get this. And of course, Strat is on pretty much every podcast forum. So anyway, Austin, thanks. Thanks for a virtual trip to the station in Phoenix. And I'm sure we'll be talking very, very soon.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Hal. Talk soon.
All right. Thanks.